Hello, Internet. This is Derek with Dirty Sprocket, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the MySequel podcast. As the name suggests, we talk about movie sequels, what makes them good, what makes them bad, and we even get to spend a little bit of time talking about the sequel we would like to see. So tonight, in our first episode, we could talk about one of my favorite movies ever made, Army of Darkness. Now, regardless of my feelings on this movie, the big thing we're going to talk about tonight is this a good sequel to the Evil Dead franchise? We're going to get into that and more in this first episode of the MySequel podcast, Army of Darkness. This is Derek Olson with MySequel podcast. Tonight we've got with us Jake Kiley.
Hello.
Ryan Brewer.
Hello.
And Robert Soderstrom.
Hello.
And Robert is very graciously let us record in his trailer tonight. So if you hear weird shit happening in the background, blame Robert and his neighbors.
I thought we agreed you weren't going to talk about that.
I'm going to talk about that. Of course we're going to talk about that.
Although you could just pretend we're like on a movie set and this is Robert's trailer.
Oh, yeah.
So.
I didn't say.
I'm just going to
Or I could
pretend
pretend like I don't know
trailer.
you people and call 911.
Who are these people in my house and why did they bring all this podcast?
With all this recording equipment. Get them.
There's all these people showed up and they're recording. And they're
Squatters.
talking about movies.
The bad kind of movies.
Robert's like, prank on you guys. I don't actually live here.
And we're off to a great start.
Yes.
Like I said, this is the MySequel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight we are going to talk about, personally, one of my favorite movies of all time. Robert and I were talking before we started recording. This is probably the movie I've seen the most of any other movie. So I absolutely adore Army of Darkness. But with the MySequel podcast, we're specifically talking about movies and how they relate to being sequels, not necessarily if they're good movies or bad movies. Are they good sequels or bad sequels? So, to start off, we're going to talk a little bit about the movie series that led up to this point. Which, if you haven't seen them, my God, go see them. Especially ahead of Stars is created, there is going to be a TV show, kind of the Further Adventures, which is kind of a sequel to Army of Darkness. Then
Ash versus Evil Dead. That's what they're calling it, right?
Yep. Premieres on Halloween. Not sure when this episode's going to premiere, but before or after. But make sure you check it out. I know I am. I got Stars just so I could watch it.
I think you should invite us all to your house so we can watch it.
Yes. No.
Damn.
So yeah,
Derek
it's
needs
kind of
to
interesting.
watch Evil Dead movies by himself.
Yeah.
He has to watch it alone.
Don't you guys?
Private time.
That's what I do.
With no pants on.
You don't need to know. Vis-a-vis my pants.
It's all fun and games, so we start talking about your private stuff.
So yes, if you've never seen Army of Darkness, I pity you. But kind of an interesting thing, Army of Darkness is a sequel. It is actually the third movie in the Evil Dead series, so that may not make a whole shitload of sense to you. It's not called Evil Dead 3 or anything like that, and these are old movies, not the remake from a few years ago.
Well, and I think more people have actually probably seen Army of Darkness than the original two, too.
I think so.
They kind of tried to release it as a half standalone movie.
Right. Army of Darkness was the first movie in the series I saw.
Well, plus it was just a tad bit more family friendly. So, I mean, you could appeal to a much broader audience with that one.
A tad bit more being a bit of an overstatement, considering that, according to the IMDb anyway, Evil Dead 2 actually ended up with an X rating.
Wow.
Originally.
There is a... Wow. That's shocking that, like, I was going to say that has a tree rape, but not as much. The first movie has tree rape. The second one alludes to tree rape.
Every movie should have tree rape.
The remake, shockingly, I didn't think that was going to be a thing they were going to tackle in the remake. Totally tree rape in the
They
remake.
totally tree raped in the
I
remake.
want to go on record as stating I don't think any movie should have tree rape.
I feel like we shouldn't start any podcast with tree rape.
I just want, me and Jake are going on the record. We are opposed to all kinds of rape, regardless of the species of rapist.
No arbor rape around here.
No arbor rape.
So yes, there are a series of movies, Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2. Kind of interesting with that, like you said, to be in the widest. It was also the biggest budgeted of the Evil Dead movies.
That's
Which-
not saying a whole lot.
I was going to say, even then, I mean, the stop motion and the green screen stuff was pretty horrid.
This movie came out, if you haven't seen it, this movie came out in 93, so it came out close to around the time Terminator 2 came out. Just for comparison. Now, Terminator 2 had a lot bigger budget than this movie did, but they came out around the same time. Close to.
Was T2 94?
I thought it was 92.
Yeah, I think
Later
it was
92.
early 90s.
Well, according to IMDb, Army of Darkness was 92.
Okay.
So
It was closer around the time of Terminator 2. So it just gives you a little bit of sense of that was the cutting edge, and Army of Darkness was not on the cutting edge.
it just goes to show you that 1992 was just that much more of a fucking awesome year.
Yeah. Hell yeah. So, Evil Dead series. The original movie was shoestring budget. Was actually a lot of the facts we're going to talk about. Like I said, it's my favorite movie. Bruce Campbell is one of the lead in these movies. Ash is one of my favorite dudes ever. I've read his biography several times. If Chins Could Kill. So, some of the stuff we're going to talk about comes from his autobiography when he was talking about him. The first Evil Dead was actually financed by dentists. Is how they got their money in Michigan. They went around to dentists because dentists have money, and that's how they were able to finance the first movie.
Like random dentists?
I don't know, kind of.
Like
More or less.
they scheduled a cleaning, was like, hey, while you're in there,
It's one of those.
I'm doing
like,
this little film.
guy.
We'll put some of your toothbrushes in our bathroom scenes.
Yep.
Although apparently it paid off. The budget was $350,000. It made $2.6 million. So
The first Evil Dead?
yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah. No, it was a pretty big indie hit.
Yeah.
It got some traction. It in itself,
Especially overseas. Overseas,
Yeah.
that movie, like, I mean, I hate to be pun, but it killed overseas. But it was just anyway. But yeah, yeah, like the French just loved Evil Dead.
The
apparently.
French did?
Yeah, the French
The
loved
frogs liked
good.
it?
Yeah,
They should. They know what's up.
Stupid French.
But yeah, the original Evil Dead though is it's a straight up Cabin in the Woods movie. Honestly, it's kind of one of those where Cabin in the Woods comes from. Is group of friends go spend a weekend in a cabin. They find in the basement some tapes and a book. They play the tapes, which is an archaeologist was investigating the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, roughly translated the Book of the Dead, and it unleashes kind of a malevolent spirit. You're never really given a lot of information of exactly what it is. Throughout a lot of the movie, it's just a camera. You get some really crazy camera angles flying at people, and then they become possessed.
didn't they kind of pioneer some fairly new low budget effects making this
Yeah.
movie?
Some of the greatest things.
well,
is I
that
love-
entire thing with the camera, we're going through the woods, that was all an original creation that they just kind of came up with.
Wasn't it like the camera strapped to a board actually?
Yeah, that's literally all it was.
But
and
it worked really
Yeah,
well.
it
And there was
works
even a
great.
scene
Speed it up,
where like
ramp it
where
up.
it breaks through a window. Literally, all they did was they just had a guy walking ahead of it with a stick and hit the window ahead of the camera going through it. I mean, it was low budget.
Yeah.
It was low budget, but pretty groundbreaking, really well received.
I know today $350,000 seems like a lot of money to make a low budget movie because the gear is so much cheaper nowadays. But back then, that was nothing to make a movie.
Right.
And back in
Yeah.
'81. So
Well, and you got to remember too, like today, we don't do film, so
Yep.
back in the day, every shot was critical. I mean, it was gold,
Yep.
really.
It had to be gold. If it wasn't gold, then you were fucked, basically.
Right. So yeah, the original Evil Dead. Actually, one of the big stories about it. If you see the like some of the original posters and VHS copies and stuff, there's a quote from Stephen King that they just kind of happened upon. They kind of accidentally met Stephen King, and he talked about it. And they're like, "Can we use that in our box?" Stephen King was like, "Sure." Talked about how much he enjoyed it.
Are you going to share the quote with us?
I don't remember it completely offhand.
Great story.
Great story. Cool story, bro.
Well, isn't there a kind of a trade with Evil Dead and Nightmare on Elm Street? Don't we see? I
You
want
can
to
see
say
Freddy
Freddy's
Krueger's
claw.
glove.
Yeah,
Right.
is in the shed
And then
Right.
a
When
when
poster
he
for
brings
Evil
Sheila's
Dead.
head in there to smash it in the vice.
Yeah, and then a poster I think for Evil Dead is in.
Yeah,
Nightmare
there
on
was
Elm
some.
Street.
Yeah,
Yes.
they kind of liked each other's stuff, so there was that little bit of kind of mini crossover happening.
Yep.
So
Some love to Wes Craven.
But there was more than just that, though. I mean, from what I understood, I thought that there was also supposed to be a machete on the wall, and that was supposed to be an homage to Voorhees.
very well could be. It's honestly, it's been a while since I've seen like the original movie because
It's the least watched of the three for me.
And it's funny because it's probably just in movie terms, probably the best movie. It's probably the most comprehensive and competent, just straight up horror movie.
Yes.
Is Evil Dead. Because then they started taking a different track, even with Evil Dead 2, and then we'll get into it with Army of Darkness. But I mean, it is probably the most normal movie that
The other
exists
ones
in this
become,
trilogy.
like more of a comedy a little bit, and then definitely a comedy in the third one.
Yeah.
Right.
But
I would have to say, this one's the first one's the hardest one to watch for a couple of reasons.
I agree.
it's dated.
It gets
First-
annoying in a couple spots.
Exactly. Well, for me, because it was such low budget, there's a lot of guerrilla type shooting, and it's kind of hard to watch. But also because it is the most horror
Right.
driven film.
It's almost the most straightforward. Like the character of Ash in that movie, which we'll get into, is became the signature of the series. The character of Ash in the first movie is kind of a wuss.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also a downer all the way through the movie.
Right.
Like there's
Yeah.
no light at the end of the tunnel for
Yeah,
this one.
there not levity in that movie. There isn't the one-liners that eventually became known for the series, and a lot of the kind of the goofy stuff. So I agree. Like I said, in movie-making terms, it's probably the best of the three.
Maybe
I think
not
it's the
the-
least entertaining of
not
the three.
the best as far as how it was shot or how it was
Right.
produced, but the most traditional story arc and how
Yeah.
like you're expecting to watch a movie.
Yeah. Well, I want to clarify too. It's probably the one that I like the best.
As far as
But it
Raimi's
is-
style is concerned, though, I think that is definitely the definitive movie because that's everything that happened in the first one. I mean, in terms of his style, he definitely carried over into the second and the third.
That's interesting, though, Robert, that you said that's your favorite out of the trilogy.
Well, I really like some parts of the second one, and when we get to the third one, I'll get more into it. But because it is a horror movie. I mean, it is. The other ones get comical a little
Yeah.
bit,
Well-
and the third one especially is such a different animal. It's
Yeah.
if you didn't know that it was connected, like we mentioned, it's got a completely different name. It's got a completely different tone. I mean, the only character that's the same is Ash.
And some of the basic premises are the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the same universe, but I mean,
Yeah, you could watch Army of Darkness. You could just watch Army of Darkness, never having seen the first two movies, and you would have a movie experience. You wouldn't be
And I
lost.
did. That was the first movie I
Again,
ever saw.
that was the first movie I ever saw.
I didn't even know there were two other movies until like years later, and I was like, oh my god.
God is the baby.
I saw the second one first, actually.
Huh.
And I remember I was young enough that the when he come out of that shed, if I remember right, he comes out of the shed with that chainsaw and that shotgun.
Yeah.
I was like, this is badass.
Yes.
But then I watched that first one, and like when I first watched it, I was like, man, this is not a good movie. And then I watched it a few more times later, and I'm like, this is a horror
it.
movie. This is creepy.
You kind of
This is good.
You kind of have to recalibrate your expectations in each movie. It's very different.
Well, in the first one, like we're spoiled by how awesome special effects look today. But you go back to 1981, they were decent again for the budget.
stop motion.
Right.
There's some pretty gruesome stop motion in that movie that
Oh, yeah.
I think honestly kind of holds up. I don't think it's it's not perfect, but I don't think it looks as bad as some other movies I've seen. Like, oh man, that looks terrible these days. I think it's still watchable. Some of those effects from the first Evil Dead, and
The,
like,
the
yeah,
possessions wigged me out.
Yeah.
When I was younger, and the fact that one of the things I think works really well for a scare is that there isn't a transformation. You see the back of somebody's head and they're normal. They turn around and they're a demon,
Yeah.
and that's fucking scary.
Well, I think one of the gross, like where Sheila gets stabbed in the foot with a pencil. Mm-hmm. And like it looks like that looks good to this day. Like that's painful, and it kind of and really, and if you've seen the remake, I mean, the remake is very much a remake of the first movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
The remake is very much that,
And
they did a
horror
good job of carrying over like the gore in the remake. Like I know a lot of fans of the series don't like the remake. I actually really love the remake as its own animal, but I love that the thing that they really took from the first movie is the remake's fucking gruesome.
Just to kind of like put it on par with other movies for the time, you know, the makeup in this looks better than like the original Dawn of the Dead, you know, like the zombie effect and stuff, you know, versus like the possession effect. So I mean, for the original, they really kind of they did a
good job, especially with
time.
very little money.
Yeah.
With very little money.
And it's again like the story's kind of more coherent even. Again, like the second one, this kind of, and the third one even, they kind of hit this phase where stuff's just kind of happening.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of like watching like, oh, and this is happening now, and this is happening. It's just kind of like.
Well, and I think this may be a good segue. We'll because we don't want to spend too much time on this. You know, we do want to talk about Army of Darkness. We'll talk a little bit about Evil Dead 2 then, which came out several years later. They went on and made some other films in between. They actually became friends with the Coen brothers and created a movie with the Coen brothers called Crime Wave before the Coens hit it big. That's actually Sam Raimi's in Hudsucker Proxy, and Bruce Campbell's in a couple of Coen brothers movies because they were friends. Kind of grew up together. But so they went off and did a few things and had a few years and had some success from Evil Dead, and they decided to come back and do Evil Dead 2 a few years later. And Evil Dead 2 is, again, the tone changes. It's still a horror movie, but they do start bringing in some more comical aspects and a little bit kind of ridiculous. It becomes almost more ridiculous as it goes along. And but the interesting thing about it, you know, in its own sequel, we could do a whole MySequel on that one, but that the beginning of Evil Dead 2 is basically a remake of Evil Dead 1. The beginning of Evil Dead 2 is just Ash and his girlfriend going to the cabin in the woods. So nothing has happened. Like, this isn't a direct progression from the first movie, because at the end of the first movie, everybody's dead. Ash burns the Necronomicon. He goes outside, thinks everything's good, and then he gets hit by this evil camera, and that's where the movie ends. And then, but the sequel opens up with Ash going with his girlfriend. Oh God, I just realized I called Sheila his girlfriend, and Linda. Linda
that's
is
right,
the
you did.
girlfriend. Sheila's in Army of Darkness. But anyways, but it's him going with Linda to the cabin, and his friends aren't a part of the movie. Those aren't gone, and it kind of runs through a lot of the beats from the first movie in like the first 6 minutes of Evil Dead 2. Is a remake, and then it ends up with him getting hit. He kills Linda. He has to kill Linda, and then he goes outside, and then he gets hit by the evil camera, and then that's where the movie really picks up. So it is kind of, the first few minutes are a remake of the first movie, and then it progresses. And yeah, that's where it starts to change. There's Ash is a lot cooler in this movie. I mean, he starts spouting some one-liners and becomes more of a badass and ridiculous, and some of that weird humor starts coming into play. There's a scene where he thinks he's going crazy, and like there's a deer head on the wall that's laughing at him, and all these books are laughing at him, and he's going crazy, and it's awesome though. Like I really love Evil. Like my order again is like Army of Darkness, then Evil Dead, and then Evil Dead 2, and then Evil Dead. So
mine has always been Evil Dead 2. Evil Dead 2 has always been my favorite, and it didn't used to be though. I mean, Army of Darkness used to be at the top of my list, and then the more I see Evil Dead 2, the more I just love that movie and the brilliance of how they just drive Ash insane.
Yep.
And everything that happens to him. And it's like that is really the turning point for that character.
Yeah.
If you think about it, and that is like, even compared to the first movie, because in the first movie Ash doesn't really develop much at all,
right,
as a character. In fact, I think he pretty much accidentally saves the day.
It's his friend that really does most of the action.
Yeah, and then but in Evil Dead 2, that's when Ash finally becomes the Ash that we all know him to be in Army of Darkness,
which I think is partially maybe the reason why they kind of remade the first Evil Dead, was they gave him the character beats of his friend. From the first Evil Dead.
I would like to point out, actually, that something, I've known this for a long time, is that one of the reasons why they basically retold the story was copyright issues. There was a huge copyright issue between the first Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, and so they were forced to retell parts of the story, and the same thing happened with Army of Darkness,
right,
where they had to completely reinvent the story so as to avoid getting sued.
What was the issue? Didn't Sam Raimi and his brother
Well,
write
it's
it?
producers and
Yeah,
distributors,
the distributors.
and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Plus, it kind of makes sense. Like, this is before a lot of home video was there, you know? So if you kind of retell the story from everybody who's never saw the first Evil Dead, you know, they might only see the second one in the limited theater release it got, you know?
Right, and it's fine, again, because you can watch Evil Dead 2 without ever having watched Evil Dead.
Yep. They're all standalone.
Right.
Yeah.
In their own way.
Yep.
So, but yeah, Evil Dead 2, and Evil Dead 2 gives us some of the great moments where the evil gets into Ash's hand and he fights his hand and then has to chop it off with the chainsaw, and some of his great one-liners.
His own hand flips him off. That's great.
Yeah. and that's that cheesy, kind of the more comedy stuff. Yeah, there's a whole scene where his hand is running around this cabin and he's trying to shoot it. It flips him off and it gets stuck in a rat trap.
Let's get the squeaky little sound effects.
Yeah, it's just so... And honestly, it's funny, you know, I always talk to people that they love that scene of Jim Carrey and Liar Liar beating himself up. Jim Carrey has nothing on Bruce Campbell for beating the shit out of himself.
No.
They're actually very similar.
They are. They're very similar.
Very similar, yes.
But Bruce did it first. And yeah,
And
he
did it best,
beats
probably.
the shit out of himself.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed, and I don't know if they were influenced or what, but Evil Dead 2 has got a lot in common with the comedy stuff as a lot of the other horrors of the time. And the one movie that kind of stands out in my mind, I don't remember the name of it, but it was about a writer who's in this house that's possessed. And it has something to do with his kid drowning or getting caught. Anyway, he ends up being haunted by a ghost of somebody from Vietnam that he knew that died or something. And he's all kind of mummified, zombified, and he's a kind of real kind of comical. It's a horror movie, but there are definitely elements of comedy, and Army of Darkness 2 in this movie like real similar that way.
I think you just made that shit up.
No, I didn't. I'm gonna look at
Made up this movie. Well, I think a lot of it is I think that is really Sam Raimi who directed and wrote the movies. That's his sensibility. And I think as he got more confident and was able to do more, the first movie, they kind of had to make this movie. Second one, they had a lot more creative control. So I think you got more of Sam Raimi in there. Now, other Sam Raimi movies, he did the original Spider-Man trilogy, and you see a lot of the moments of comedy in those. I think one of the better horror movies of the last decade was Drag Me to Hell, which
I loved that
was
movie.
a movie he directed, but has, again, a lot of these kind of comedic elements and things like that in horror. And he was behind Hercules and Xena, all that kind of stuff. So I think that is, he likes that kind of, he likes adventure, he likes comedy, he likes horror. And I think that all coalesces into Army of Darkness.
And a lot of it, too, I mean, in all those future projects that they work on, it isn't even just Sam Raimi anymore. I mean, Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, and Bob Tapert, the producer of the Evil Dead movies,
Well, his brother,
and even
Ivan.
even his brother, Ivan, and one of his other brothers actually. What's his name? He has another brother who actually makes appearances in the movies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Ted.
Ted.
Yep.
Ted
'Cause
Raimi.
Ted is the monster in the cellar in Evil Dead 2.
And he's
And he was Joxer in Xena.
and he was just he was one of the checkout guys at Esmar when he's the guy he's telling
In
the
Army of
story to
Darkness,
at the end of Army of Darkness.
He's actually got like 5 roles in Army
Yeah,
of
he has
Darkness.
tons of them.
He keeps cropping up in little cameos.
Yeah, and he's in pretty much every one of Sam Raimi's movies as well.
Yep.
Like he'll pop up at some point, and so does Bruce Campbell. He's always in there, as
Right.
is that
That's
infernal
right.
car.
Yeah, Bruce is in all 3 Spider-Man movies.
Yep. He was in Dark Man,
Yep, he's in the very end of Dark Man.
very end of Dark Man. What was I just gonna say?
I don't think he's not quite in all of Sam Raimi's movies.
Not quite all of
There's
them,
a
but
few he didn't show up in, but
yeah.
Bruce is on. But yeah, they're good friends. I mean, they're friends. Again, if you get a chance, I do highly recommend Bruce Campbell's autobiography of Chins Could Kill. It's just great. It's him talking about his childhood, but he was friends with the Raimis growing up, and you know, they were more interested in directing. He was more interested in acting, and so they just kind of developed. And honestly, I think what I love about the book, and even what I like about these movies a lot, is it inspires me because I see a lot of what we're doing with Dirty Sprocket in those guys. That's just, you know, they didn't know what they were doing. It wasn't like they had money or tons of experience, but they went out and were making stuff. And, you know, it eventually led to some pretty awesome careers. But so I have a lot of respect for these guys and what they've done, even if it's not always perfect. It's always interesting, and I think that's Evil Dead 2. Evil Dead 2 is a very interesting movie. But I think from there, let's jump.
Should we quick recap the plot of the first two? Just so I don't know if we got that out
Sure.
there.
Yeah, I mean, pretty basic. The first movie is, again, a group of friends go to a empty cabin in the woods, find the Necronomicon in the basement, and tapes from an archaeologist who's deciphering it. They play the tape, and it unleashes the evil, possesses his friends, and Ash is forced to kill him off. Evil Dead 2 is just him and his girlfriend Linda go to the cabin in the woods. Same deal. They unleash the monster, the Necronomicon. But there's also the archaeologist who's discovering it. We don't see him. We hear him more. But his daughter and her boyfriend are coming to the cabin because they're there to research the book with her dad.
And that's the actual story. Like the rest of the stuff is just the recap at the very beginning, plus a little bit of extra with Linda.
Which I always thought was kind of weird. Like, why are they all going to the same cabin? Did they
and
go
that's
to the
'cause
wrong one?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
her. It was her. I don't exactly know.
It was her uncle, is what it was.
No, it was her father.
Was it her father?
Yeah,
I thought it was
it's
her
her
uncle.
father.
But I mean, why did they ever explain why Bruce Campbell goes to this? Yeah, that's what I thought.
They don't really ever mention how they
here's a
know to go
cabin.
to this cabin.
Yeah,
Sex,
no,
sex,
that
drugs,
part's
and
never-
rock and roll.
Yeah.
Was that the name of that movie?
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
So, but then, so it just kind of gets more fodder for the Deadites, which are possessed. People get possessed. Call them the Deadites. Again, Ash, he's forced to kill Linda. He's fighting his hand. He's going crazy. And then the archaeologist's daughter shows up with her boyfriend and a couple of kind of rednecks who help them get to the house. They start dying off one by one, but she knows through reading the book's pages that they can send the evil back. So Ash helps her. He connects in the most badass scene ever. He takes a chainsaw and puts it on his stump, so he's got a chainsaw for her hand now. And he has a sawed-off shotgun, and he fights a big evil Deadite to fight the big monster. So they get the monster, but they kind of the girl dies. His hand even kills her. Hand stabs her to death
With the special knife.
with the special knife that's never really talked about.
The
just
sacrificial
there.
knife.
And then
That
what
you
it
can
leads
totally
to,
tell is
though,
rubber.
is Ash is sucked into the portal too with the evil, and it sends him back in time to medieval times. And he's surrounded by knights, and he blows up a Deadite, and then he's kind of worshipped, and that's how Evil Dead 2 ends. Which leads into, then I think we're good. We'll start talking about Army of Darkness a little bit. Which leads into Army of Darkness, which is again a remake of the first two movies. There's a real short sequence, kind of explains everything up to this point, but again, cuts out most everything. It just leaves in. He went with Linda. The book was there. They were able to use the book to send it back, but he gets sucked back in time with it. I mean, they condense all that into like 30 seconds.
Yep.
With Bridget Fonda,
And
who
a
plays
little
Linda this time
S-mark
around.
too.
I think that was the big thing with the lawsuit for the copyright issues was for Army of Darkness anyway, was that they had to recap that as short as possible, because if it resembled the original movies too much in too much of a way, they were going to get in big trouble.
Well, and some of it was footage from the original movie, though.
There's
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
bit.
just
a little
very,
bit.
very tiny bit.
Yeah, there's a little bit that's a recount.
And I think that's also one of the reasons why they called it Army of Darkness and not Evil Dead 3.
So why would that be an issue? I mean, do they not want to make money off this, producers, or
It
what?
just, I mean, there's so much with any of that kind of stuff. When you get distributors,
Yeah,
and they were all kind of made by different
I'm gonna
companies
find
and
out
producers.
Because I remember hearing about it. I'm going to look it up.
Just for example, I'll throw Firefly out there. Fox owned the rights to Firefly, and then Paramount actually had to buy the rights to make the movie Firefly from Fox before they could come out with Serenity. It's just a weird thing like that. Joss Whedon didn't own the rights to go make Serenity. It had to be purchased.
Yeah, I get that, but I mean the thing with Evil Dead is, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that they wrote it, they directed it, they produced it, and I think they even the distribution would be the only place where they'd have trouble.
They
But
probably
that's a lot of times
but
where
I'm
shit
confident
gets
they
owned.
owned everything else, all the rights. So I mean
The
that's
rights to the characters and stuff, but then the problem is the movie themselves. Well, that's why even the third Army of Darkness is produced by Dino De Laurentiis, who is a big producer and stuff. So I mean, it was a different producer, different distributor again. Kind of finishing up our discussion on the intro is it does add a whole new element that was not in the earlier movies. That is that becomes important later in the movies and seems like it will become important in the TV show is the inclusion of where Ash and Linda worked, which was S-Mart, which leads to some of the best one-liners in Army of Darkness. But they
Which
work
is also a real shopping
Yes, it
chain
is.
in Mexico.
Yep, there is actual S-Marts.
Wait, this all takes place in Mexico?
Yes.
Okay, now it all makes sense.
I believe in Mexico it'd be.
I thought he went back to like 1300
SMR.
AD, but it's just Mexico.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we just lost the Mexican fan base.
Okay, Robert already killed the French fan base.
Everybody hates us. We have no fan
Who
base.
else can we offend?
Yeah. This is going well. For only our second episode of MySequel, we've already offended everybody.
Or possibly the first.
Or possibly the first.
Possibly.
You don't know the order. But yeah, so we get Ash has now gone back in time, except for the change from Evil Dead 2 is where he goes back in time, kills a monster, and is kind of hailed as a hero. Army of Darkness picks up. He goes back in time and is immediately captured by who we kind of are led to believe is King Arthur. They say Arthur. There is a wizard. They don't call him Merlin, but pretty much is King Arthur and Merlin.
I don't think he actually has a name.
The king is Arthur.
No, I mean the wizard.
Oh, yeah.
He
The
calls him
wizard
like
is just...
the wise man or something
Yeah.
like that. Even.
That's all they call him.
Well, and Ash calls him all sorts of horrible names. Spinach Chin, which is one of my favorites.
This movie definitely has the best one-liners.
Oh, it's
out of all
all one-liners. Yeah. This movie is beyond quotable because almost every line in the movie is a one-liner.
Ash and Housewares.
Ash. Yes. So he's taken captive along with somebody who's at war with Arthur, Henry the Red. They're taken to a castle where we meet Sheila, the love interest for the movie, whose brother was a knight with Arthur and who was killed.
Played by M. Beth Davids, by the way.
M. Beth Davids, who went on to be in Schindler's List after this.
Really?
Yeah. Huh. No, she got nominated for an Oscar at one point for a small indie movie in the early 2000s. So no, she went on to actually have a
successful career.
Yeah. Nobody else did. Bruce is still kind of doing what Bruce does, and
Sam Raimi.
Sam Raimi did. Sam Raimi went on and made a fuck ton of money.
Bridget Fonda had.
And Bridget Fonda, but she was just kind of a cameo for being friends with him. Because Bridget Fonda was in one of Sam Raimi's movie, Simple Plan, which is a really good movie, way different than every other Sam Raimi movie. Is a Simple Plan. But anyways, so which leads to they throw Ash into a pit to fight a deadite. Ash, of course, kills it because he's Ash. He gets his chainsaw back in one of the most glorious scenes ever where he's in a pit. He jumps up into the air as the wise man drops down his chainsaw and it connects in midair with a great sound. It goes thunk. And then he comes back down and kills the deadite, and it's amazing. So then they decide that he's spoken of in prophecy in the Necronomicon, which actually in the movies he is. Ash is in the Necronomicon.
Or a version of Ash.
Yeah. So they actually send him on his way on a quest to retrieve the Necronomicon to stop the evil spread, because there are deadites around. So he does go. He goes off. He doesn't listen to anything anybody tells him because he's a dipshit. That's one of the most defining character traits of Ash is he's a dipshit.
He
I don't think it's so much that he's a dipshit.
Every
I think
single
it's just that
syllable, but he got the spirit of
Got the
those
gist of
words
it.
down.
I don't really think it's so much that he's a dipshit. I think it's just that he's so annoyed and so just tired of everything that's been happening to him.
I just want to go home.
He just wants to go home.
He
doesn't care.
And he's the best. He's got him and M. Beth Davids, Sheila, they have a love scene before he goes off, and just the worst.
Which you actually get to see if you ever see the bootleg version of the movie.
Right.
Really?
Yep.
Yes. Well, I guess I can't call it
The director's cut.
Yeah,
there is the director's cut, but the director's cut kind of sucks.
It does.
Watch
actually.
That's one of those. Do not watch if you haven't seen this movie. Do not go get the director's cut. Watch the theatrical version.
Get the theatrical version.
Much better.
So much better.
Because the original ending sucks. We'll
I'm gonna disagree with you on that, but we'll get to that.
In comparison to what
we'll
the
get
theatrical with the theatrical ending, that one is way better. But if we hadn't seen the theatrical cuts ending,
I would like to point out, and this is something that you and I talked about this earlier, that I kind of, because I hadn't watched this movie in a long time, and I'd sort of forgotten about this, but it's important to point out. The first Evil Dead movie is a horror, and we kind of touched on this a little bit. Mm-hmm. The second Evil Dead movie is a horror with moments of levity. This is a straight-up campy movie. Mm-hmm. This movie does not take itself seriously one little bit.
Corny.
And so it's important that from a sequel point of view, this movie takes a sharp departure from its predecessors.
And again,
Yes.
talking about the movie they wanted to make, a lot of it, in hearing them, the filmmakers talk about creating Army of Darkness, was they're big fans growing up of Ray Harryhausen movies, like Jason and the Argonauts, with stop-motion skeletons. That's why there's
Clash of the
stop-motion
Titans.
skeletons in this. They loved the old adventure movies that there used to be, of those kind of movies. So that's what they wanted to make this time around. They're just like, we don't want to make a horror movie. This is the movie. We want to make this kind of campy, old school adventure movie is what they wanted to do. And so that's kind of what the movie is. It's an adventure movie. It's not a horror. It much more follows along that line.
It embodies it pretty well, too.
Yeah.
And it kind of embodies their entire career, actually. I think Army of Darkness is basically what gave birth to Hercules and Xena.
Yeah, if you've
and
seen
all
the
those,
Hercules
'cause
and
it's
Xena
all
show,
very
they're very similar. Yeah.
Something else that is kind of an impression that I got from this movie, and I wonder if it's not true actually, but to me there were a lot of scenes where it was almost as if they got to a point and somebody was like, "Well, what should we do now?" And somebody else said, "You know what? I like the Three Stooges."
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
you
No,
know,
I completely agree.
The original script for the movie was only 43 pages long, so it wouldn't surprise me if they were just like, yeah, let's just fucking do this, I guess.
And it's, again, this movie is pretty much what they could get away with. At this point, they were able to kind of make whatever they wanted to make. Because it was also fairly, this was the most expensive of the trilogy, but it was still cheap enough. There was not a lot of oversight going on in this movie. They were able to do whatever they wanted to do, and I think that's what a lot of it is they love the Three Stooges and slapstick humor. So let's put some slapstick in there. We love stop motion skeletons. Fuck it, let's put stop motion skeletons in here. It was just kind of like, this was just totally an exercise in just the movie they wanted to make. They didn't care if it was good or bad or whatever it was. This was just what they wanted to make at this time.
And again, it's just like stuff is just kind of happening. You know, like it's not very, traditional story structure. For
right.
The,
The
most
plot
part.
is,
It's kind of vague, and it's like, well, I'm going to be in a windmill for a while now, and there's going to be, what was the little people that...
Yeah,
tie
so
up?
the scene in
little
the
act.
windmill, which is important for the rest of the movie, is he ends up holing up in a windmill, and he sees a reflection of himself that looks angry, and he runs into it, and the mirror breaks into 1,000 pieces, and then little versions of Ash come out of the mirror and attack him. And actually, too, in all three of these movies, there's something with a mirror in each one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In Evil Dead 1, there's like a liquid mirror that he touches, and it's weird. In Evil Dead 2...
he
there's
sees
another
himself
version of
again.
himself that talks to him through the mirror in this one. So there's always mirror stuff in them. And then the little people, which is a perfect example of that whole scene, is slapstick.
Yeah.
They tie him, like Gulliver's Travels.
That's
they
the
knock him
movie,
out and
or
they tie him up to the
They-
ground.
They straight up poke him in the ass with a hot fork or whatever.
Yeah,
it was.
and he gets his head on a stove that's heating up, and we'd be like, you'd be burned to hell. No, he's fine. He's just got little black soot on his face. Right?
yeah.
Yeah, when he shoveled his face off that stove, I was so waiting for him to go whoop 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 whoop.
I know.
Yeah.
But and again, I think that's the thing. That's what I love about this movie is those stupid moments. But then one of the little ashes get inside of him, and then eventually grows into another version of himself. So then there's Evil Ash, and Evil Ash shoots him in the face with a shotgun.
It doesn't grow.
Yeah, it does.
It grows out of his arm,
It
yeah.
grows out of
Dear
his
God,
arm.
it's getting bigger.
Yeah, because he like rips his shirt open and then there's
Into
just
the eyeball.
Yeah,
in
but I
it?
mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't. The little guys don't grow into a big guy. I mean, he
No.
he
The little guy gets
The little
inside
guy, like,
of
jumps
him,
inside
and
of his
then
mouth. Grows-
Literally,
grows inside
it goes
his
in his
twin.
mouth, and he
Yeah.
pours like boiling hot water down there.
I love that we're arguing
like
about the exact physics of how Evil Ash comes into being.
Well, you just said that, and it just to me, maybe I missed something, but it sounded to me like a little guy grew into a big guy.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
not what happened.
No,
He
no.
grew a Siamese twin.
He goes
Yeah.
inside,
They separate.
and then it separates. Yep, which leads to the best line of the movie, and this is also why the director's cut is not as good.
Yes.
Because the greatest line, maybe the greatest line in the whole movie, is there's Evil Ash, and he has a little dance. Again, the Goofy. He does a dance. He's like, you're goody little two shoes. Goody little two shoes. And then Ash puts a shotgun in his face and then shoots him. And he goes flying like 10 feet into a tree. And then it's the good, bad, I'm the guy with the gun. That line is not in the director's cut. He just
What?
goes,
He says
I'm
something
not that
completely
good. He
different.
goes, I'm not that good. And it's like, no, that's bullshit. That line is so perfect.
I don't even remember what the bootleg version was or the director's cut
It's-
version was.
It's just not as good.
No, it's not. It's terrible. Like
also-
as soon as I saw that scene and that line came up, and I was looking forward to the original line, and he said something completely different, I was like, "What the fuck just happened?"
Yep.
There's a lot in that particular part of the movie where, and we mentioned this earlier, where it's really hard to distinguish him from Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
Like that type of acting is. There's a lot of similarities there, and just their appearance and their
very, very expressive. You know, with what they're doing. It's not a restrained performance. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
He doesn't quite have the rubber face that Jim Carrey does.
No.
But there's definitely.
He's got that chin.
Yeah.
Which, but yeah, so he dismembers the evil version and buries him. And then he goes off to find the book. And he comes to find that there's 3 books. And he's supposed to say these magic words. Which leads to another great scene where he forgets the words that he's supposed to say. And he goes, Klaatu, Varata. Which is actually from The Day the Earth Stood Still. Klaatu is the robot.
Yeah.
Huh.
So so he kind of fucks up and he says it wrong and unleashes the army of darkness, the army of the dead. So he escapes back because the wise man is supposed to use the Necronomicon to send him back in time. But he comes back and everybody's defeated because he fucked up and the evil is coming and they're going to kill them all. And Ash doesn't care. Which leads to get to one of my favorite parts of the movie, just to show the character of Ash. Is he comes back into the castle. He knows he screwed up. Nobody else quite knows yet. And all these townspeople are congratulating him. He's like, yeah. He's like, oh, you did it. Yeah. He just goes, get the fuck out of my face. Like, pushes people out of the way. And it's great. But then they find, he just wants to go back. He doesn't care. But then Sheila gets kidnapped by a Deadite. So he decides he's going to stick around and fight the evil using science. Which leads to the greatest montage of all time, is them gearing up to stop the Army of Darkness. He takes his car that traveled back in time with
The
it.
Oldsmobile.
Yep. They turn it into a death machine. He teaches them how to make gunpowder, which Peter Jackson ripped off a little scene from Army of Darkness. Is because there's a point where Ash is making gunpowder with the wise man. And he's working on it. He turns away and the wise man takes it and he's trying to look at it in the flame of a candlelight. And then Ash looks at him and goes, you know, in the montage, and he pulls the sack away, then he moves the candle away from him slightly. That is directly a scene from The Two Towers.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Where Saruman and Wormtongue are doing it. It's the exact same scene as in The Two Towers.
It's pretty cool.
Which I totally think, too, that Peter Jackson took it from that, because it's kind of a thing. Cause,
that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Especially considering Peter Jackson's
Yeah,
background.
it made low-budget horror movies.
Yeah.
A long time ago.
What was the
what
one
you
he
do.
made?
Dead Alive.
Dead Alive,
Yep.
Great movie.
Yep. Very similar, actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ridiculous slapstick gore.
Yeah.
But so we have, and it's Evil Ash is now, he reconstitutes himself. He turns Sheila evil, and then they attack the castle to get the book back.
Which Evil Ash is pretty much like whatever this demonic force is, we're kind of assuming, right?
Right, but there's still Ash qualities about him. I
Yeah.
feel like Ash is in there.
Totally.
And Bruce Campbell gets to play both parts, which is fun. So there's a big battle, which is really fun. It's, again, stupid, but it's got all sorts of skeletons and monsters, and he teaches kung fu to the knights, and they hit him with kung fu a little bit, and they throw bombs at him, and it's just awesome.
That's one of the things that I didn't like.
Oh, really?
Well, because, and again, I'm going back to the first one, the horror quality of it
Right.
was there was a lot of possession. Like, you didn't know if the evil was going to possess somebody next, right? And it was much more vicious and just scary, right? This one was kung fu all the way through. Like, even in the very beginning, when they throw him in the pit, he gets into a fist fight with a demon.
Right.
That shit's stupid. Like, with the skeletons, all right. But with the demons, and they're doing this fist fighty thing, and this kung fu and backflips, that's like, I'm not buying this. I want to see, like, blood and pea green soup and spinning heads and some scary shit.
Well, this movie
there's plenty of blood. But I mean, that's kind of the whole point, is that they didn't want to make Evil Dead.
This movie was also PG-13.
Well, there wasn't
This
any
movie was
blood.
PG-13.
Like, he shot how many people with shotgun at close range, and like there's no wounds.
Right.
Like nothing.
And there's
That's actually
no
the
ammo
director's
for the
cut.
shotgun too. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
yeah, just
always-
keep shooting.
Yeah.
But that is actually the director's cut. The director's cut has more blood and guts in it.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of stuff they cut out to
Although
get
I'm
the
surprised
PG-13.
the original PG-13 version actually got away with the blood water fountain.
Yes.
I'm surprised they got away.
I think
with
it's so cheesy that it's a fountain of blood that it's
Well,
okay.
and that's like the only real gore.
Right.
Everything else is all
yeah,
skeleton.
it's all very
But
bloodless.
then there's still elements of those original movies in there. Like, I mean, like the whole, that the scary person turning around crazy, like that happens.
Yeah, because there's a point where the lady gets possessed when he's hanging out with Arthur.
The hag or whatever.
She bitch.
Yeah, she bitch. Yeah,
she bitch.
But it wasn't scary.
But yeah,
no, but
Yeah,
I mean,
it
it is meant to be a
It was not
callback.
as well done.
yeah, it's a very different.
And again, when it doesn't matter that they did that. When as soon as she turns around, it's a kung fu fight.
Yeah, it is a kung
really,
fu fight.
It really takes away from that whole moment.
Yes.
Is I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yep.
Is there could have been less fighting for me and more scary stuff. Like, and it didn't have to go so far as the first one. I get that they're trying to reach to a broader audience,
I see what you're saying.
but there could have been more.
Well, I don't know how much they wanted to reach a broader audience. The PG-13 was kind of Dino De Laurentiis, the producer.
Yeah.
Wanted the PG-13. I think, again, all they wanted to do was they had this property. They wanted to make... It was kind of one of those... They only returned to this series when they wanted to do something.
Yeah.
You know, Evil Dead 2, they wanted to do something different. Army of Darkness, they wanted to do something different. And then even with the TV series, it's kind of like, we have an idea of something we kind of want to tackle now.
Yeah.
It really doesn't go together. They don't really go together within themselves.
It's more like
I get all that, but the point I'm
Right.
trying to make is because they did change that, I found that part of the movie lacking.
Sure.
I think it did not do credit to the movie.
Sure.
well, and like the whole fight scene. I mean, you can honestly just kind of fast forward because nothing really happens.
It's
You know,
just a fight scene.
it's just-
It just goes
and
on for
again,
a while.
The same thing happens in the Two Towers.
You know, and the other thing too is that really bothered me is at the end of the second one he gets his chainsaw, and that's really awesome. Mm-hmm. Which he does nothing with in the third one.
Yeah, we kind of
Like,
glossed over
immediately
that.
he gets a hand.
To say how ridiculous this movie is Ash makes a working metal prosthetic
Kind of a steampunk.
that he can
In
use
medieval times,
In medieval
mind you.
times, and he's not smart.
Well, that's the thing. Like out
Ash
of
is
nowhere,
not
he's
smart.
a mechanical genius. Like he does that.
not
He fixes
smart.
his
Well,
car that fell
and
500 feet out of the sky.
It's completely unnecessary to the story too, because
Right.
he builds that. We show that he's got this bionic strength with it because he crushes.
Jesus.
But then he uses it for absolutely nothing
Right.
other than a new
Not
hand.
showing to have him not having a hand.
Right.
The whole time.
Yeah,
I would
I think it was
much
a
rather
shortcut. I think it was a filmmaking
Yeah,
shortcut.
Yeah.
much rather have had him going to town on a bunch of baddies
Yes.
with that chainsaw.
Which I think is interesting because it feels like that's what they're doing with the TV series.
Yeah.
they're going back to the chainsaw hand and all that. But kind of back to we're about done with the actual movie, and then we're going to kind of discuss some qualities about it. So pretty much, he fights. He stops evil Sheila. He stops evil Ash. He burns him to the point where he's just a skeleton. Which I think Bruce Campbell called it the Widowmaker, because there's a point where he has a fight scene with an animatronic skeleton, which apparently was fucking terrifying. With him talking about it, that it was on rails and it did certain things, and you just had to get out of its way at times. Like it was choreographed, but not really. And he talked about how terrifying, and even in an earlier draft, in the director's cut, it shot fire out of its mouth because. But he stops evil Ash, blows him up. Because of that, Sheila turns back to normal.
I would just like to point out that
Sure.
you had mentioned one of your favorites one-liners now. My favoriteest one-liner in this movie is when she says, "You found me beautiful once," and his retort was, "Well, honey, you got real ugly."
Yes.
I love
Because he's such an asshole. And apparently in the original script, there was supposed to be a scene where Ash tries to barter with the Army of Darkness by trying to give them children. Yep, they cut it out. It's in the comic adaptation of it. It's in there.
That's great.
Well, and that's just kind of like the
They made him a worse character. They kind of pulled back on some of that. The character of Ash is an asshole.
I kinda
He's
like it
not a
as a
hero.
Well,
But he
he's
doesn't
kinda-
start
yeah.
off that way.
Well, that's
He's
the thing.
competent.
He evolves each movie. The
Yeah.
first
Right.
movie, he's kind of a wuss. Second movie, he's just kind of a badass, but he's not really a dick. I don't think, right?
Not so
No,
much.
he's just
And the
trying.
third
He's just
movie-
trying to stop people from doing
Right.
something
Yeah.
stupid because these people just come along all of
Right.
a sudden,
Yep.
and they don't know what's going on, and he's trying to like, no, you need to go. We need to get out of here. We
Yep.
can't stay here.
And the third
they won't
one,
listen
he's a
to him.
dick.
They think he's a crazy guy. They lock him in the cellar with the dead grandma.
Well, I think the most important thing about this movie is Ash is our protagonist. He is not the hero. Arthur is the hero.
Yep.
He's the heroic. He's that. Ash is just our protagonist. He's the character we follow. He ends up doing stuff because the one thing he's competent at is killing monsters. He's really good at that. But other than that, he's not a hero. He's an asshole to people. He's a coward. There's lots of times where he's just a straight up coward.
He's only doing it so he can go home.
Right.
Until the end, he kind of has his
and he has that moment.
Changes his mind.
But he's a coward. He's all sorts of stuff. So which is fun. That's one thing I like about
He
the
still
movie.
completes the hero's journey,
He does.
and that makes him our hero.
Well, he makes him our protagonist.
right.
I'd argue with the hero's journey thing that it
protagonist
doesn't
journey.
necessarily mean he's a hero in that terms. But I agree. I mean, he completes that journey. He has that. And then
But let's get to the end though really quickly
Yeah.
so we can start.
yeah. Well, then the ending of the movie is he gets a potion from the wizard, but he fucks up again. Doesn't recite the words right.
I think you'd write that shit down.
Yeah, because he screws it up and he ends up back in present day in S-Mart talking to Ted Raimi and telling the whole story. Of course, Ted Raimi doesn't believe him. But then as they're in S-Mart, a Deadite shows up because he fucked up. He didn't say
The
the
same
words
she
right.
bitch, if I remember right.
What?
Isn't it the same she bitch from?
No.
It's not. It's just.
It might be actually the same
I think
actress, but
it's-
it's not meant to be the same
Oh, okay.
character.
It looked really similar to the one in the bottom of the well, though.
It's a possessed lady who's shopping at S-Mart.
Right.
Okay.
I think it maybe was actually the same actress that they reused, but it's not the same character. But so Deadite shows up. He shoots the Deadite like 50 times with the rifle that he gets in S-Mart. He saves everybody, and he has the greatest. He kind of goes back into voiceover, and everybody's surrounding him after he's killed the Deadite, and he grabs this lady that was listening to him, and I could have stayed in the past. I could have been king, but in my own way, I am king. And then he has his last line. He dips the lady. He goes, "Hail the king, baby," and kisses her, and then to black. The original director's cut ending is a different ending.
It is.
It's the same idea that he fucked up and said the words wrong, but it shows him in this cave. What he did was he collapsed the cave around him with the car and all of his stuff, and he's supposed to basically sleeps through time, like Rip Van Winkle. But because he screwed up, he comes out and he's got a huge beard and long hair and stuff, and he comes out and he realizes that the world's been destroyed. He comes out because he slept too long, and the whole world is in ruins.
Yes.
I kind of like that idea, too. Like, just an
I think
alternate
it
universe,
could have
it's
been.
funny.
See, that's
Yeah.
the thing. It's like I have no problem with the
It's
original
not a bad
theatrical
ending.
Yeah.
I just
But-
think that in terms of the Evil Dead universe, that seems like a more likely ending.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Especially
and in
considering
comparison
that he
of how
screwed it up.
fun the ending of the theatrical version is, because that last 6 or 7 minutes of
It's
that
funny.
ending
Yeah, it's fun.
is so much
Yeah.
fun.
And finally, we see him just not screwed at the end. Like,
Right.
you know.
Again, he's just a badass. But he went back to working housewares.
Yeah.
Like that's the end of the movie. He's at
Name's
S-Mart.
Ash. Housewares.
Beat cancer and went back to work at the carpet store.
I still love how he addresses that Deadite. Actually, when, "Ma'am, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to ask you to leave the store."
Yeah, they go, "Who the hell are you?" He goes, "Ash, cogs and rifle, housewares."
He's got a really good monologue when he first addresses the crowd in the beginning of the movie,
Oh yeah.
where he this is my boomstick. And,
Yes.
and he goes into detail about
It's a double barrel. God, I used to be able to quote this.
That's
whole
with a hair trigger.
the hair trigger. That's right.
At
The Sweet
Smart's top
Baby
of the
was
line.
made in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Retails from about $109.95. You can find this in the sporting goods department.
Yeah.
That's
So
right.
then-
Shop
This is my
smart.
boomstick.
Shop S-Smart. You got that?
So this movie. So that is the movie. So now we're going to get into kind of a discussion, and I think we might actually have differing opinions on this one. Is in terms of this movie being a sequel, how do we think this works as a sequel to the Evil Dead series? I personally think it's a great sequel because in my mind, a sequel doesn't necessarily need to just follow along with what was there and just extend that story. I think sequels, a lot of times, sequels that I enjoy, I feel like they are doing something different with it. It's not a retread of what came before. It's wildly different, but I like as a sequel, what it does is it kind of takes the universe that it's kind of set up in the previous movies and kind of goes off in a totally different direction from what you would expect. So I like that as a sequel.
I agree. I have to say, too, I mean, as far as sequels go, and especially in the realm of horror movies, you see this all the time with horror movies. And usually it's by about the 6th or 7th movie in the series.
They go to space.
And they go to space, and Freddy's spouting one-liners, and Jason's beating up naked teenagers using the same methods he did before because it's a simulation. And it's horror movies inevitably almost always become a comedy anyway. because you can only take them seriously for so long, because the concept usually only works for 1 or 2 movies.
Right.
And so it almost seems to me like Sam Raimi and Bob Tabert and Bruce Campbell's approach to the Evil Dead movies is sheer genius, because instead of just making a direct regular horror movie sequel, they just kept doing something different each time. Almost as if they knew that if we keep doing these movies, they're eventually just going to become this anyway. So let's just do whatever we want.
Right.
And just see what happens. And they may not be the greatest movies ever made as far as mainstream cinema is concerned, but I think as far as sequels are concerned, and especially in the terms of Army of Darkness, even though it was a radical departure, I think it was a very logical departure. It was just the logical next step for the series, because even ending Evil Dead 2 with him going back in time, that was automatically setting it up for being very farcical. I mean, very funny, because we've already been through the horror movie. Now we went back in time. It's like, oh my God, I mean, what's going to happen now?
Right.
What could you possibly do with that premise that's not going to be funny?
I feel like it's kind of like, what will people watch? Almost like an experiment, you know? Like, it's kind of their pet project. And they're like, all right, we made it pretty successful as far as an indie horror film goes, you know? The second one, they said, well, we're just going to 10 times the gore, you know, similar storyline, throw a few jokes in there. And then the third one is just kind of, again, we'll just do whatever we want, you know? I think as a sequel, it's not a very good sequel, honestly. It's not like following the similar storyline to the beginning one or whatever, but as standalone movies, I think they're all very good movies.
Okay.
Or enjoyable to watch.
Sure. I think, Robert, you're more in line with what Jake's talking about.
Same church, different pew, I think. But my issue is that they got away from the horror thing, and you know, I kind of agree with what Ryan said, but for different reasons. Because by the time you get to the 6th and 7th movie, the reason they become so bad is because you just flat run out of things to write about.
Right. Well, some of these movies are not meant to be more than a movie.
Right. Yeah. And the thing with this was the third one. This, I love the concept, like, because they took it into a different time. I mean, they could even take it into a different dimension. They had so much opportunity to come up with a horror adventure that was more closer and
more true to the original.
Right?
Sure.
I mean, I love this is an enjoyable movie. I like watching this movie. I love the one-liners. There's so much about this movie that's just great. But I think they traded in some really excellent story for some really lame comedy. Hijinks, yeah, I think, and I mean, it's cool. It's what they wanted to do, and it worked for them. And you know, I mean, it's a cult classic movie.
Yeah, it's a movie we're still talking about.
Yeah,
today.
but I mean, there was I would, you know, instead of seeing Ash play with, you know, little midget versions of himself and the whole, I would like to have seen more action with the chainsaw and the shotgun, and there are elements that they left untouched for the sake of comedy. I would have so much liked it to be more of a horror with elements of adventure as opposed to a comedy with elements of adventure.
I think you're right.
What I was
it's
going to
different.
say about that, though, is that in many respects, I almost see the Evil Dead movies, especially now, and with the upcoming Evil Dead series on Starz, which I'm really, really looking forward to. I see it as being not so much, you know, hey, let's make a horror movie anymore. I see it as, what kind of many different situations can we put this character in now? Because we're not just seeing Ash in a sequel anymore. I think we're seeing more of the evolution of a character's just journey through life and these impossible situations that he's in. You know, Ash is basically like the John McClane of horror movies, because he just keeps getting thrown into the same situation. And I mean, obviously, as we've already seen with previews for the Evil Dead series, they're bringing back the chainsaw, and that's the wonderful thing about the Evil Dead movies. You can do that. It's almost like a cartoon. You can take those same elements and you can bring them back at any time you want, because that's the kind of story it is to me. You can still even make it scary if you want to.
I really feel like throughout the movies, though, Ash is only the same character in name. Like,
I
again,
agree. He is very. He has arcs within the individual movies, but from movie to movie,
Yeah.
He is a very different character from movie to movie.
And like
Well, I
again,
think, but I see that's one of the things I like. Again, that's something that I see differently. That's one of the things that I like very much is that over the course of these movies, we see a true evolution of Ash's character. I mean,
Right.
Ryan's right, and
what
even
I'm
that
getting
one,
at,
he's
yeah.
a sissy.
Yeah.
He's very
yeah.
much a coward.
Yep.
But he's been through some shit, and by the time we get to the third one, this shit's old hat.
He just
and
doesn't
he's good
give a
at
shit.
it. And yeah, I mean, he's tired of being in the situation. He's had no breaks, and so you know, as much as a dick as he is, you really like this guy.
Yeah.
I want to see Army of Darkness Ash in Evil Dead 1. Just like
Well, and I think the interesting thing is, like you're talking about, I think the sequel you wanted to see is, I think, the TV show that they're coming out with. Now, we don't know for sure, but seeing from previews, it feels like more going back the direction that it's still comedy, but they are going much more back towards the horror elements of it.
Well, and I was going to say, and they might not ever say this, and they might not even feel this way, but I think if you look at the reboot of Evil Dead, and you take and we haven't seen, of course, the series yet, so we don't know. I mean, it could be real comical like the movie, but you kind of get the gist that there's going to be comical elements, but it's going to be really more kind of like the second one.
I think so.
I think they realized that they may have missed the mark on the third one. For as fun and as good as that movie is, they really kind of betrayed the essence of the first two. Like the balance of humor and horror in the second one, I think is spot on.
Okay.
And I think if they would have stuck with that formula in the third one and taken more advantage of, like the chainsaw and just the environment, the fact that he's in this world where he might be top notch at killing zombies in the 21st century, the 20th century, not so much in the 13th.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where he's got to deal with somebody who knows how to wield a sword.
or let's just say the shotgun actually uses ammo.
Yeah.
And so like he
So
runs out of
just
ammo,
magically
and he has to find ways
By the way,
to fight
did you
these
guys notice
guys.
how many times he shoots that double barrel shotgun
lot.
3 times?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, all the time. They didn't give a shit about how many bullets are in a gun.
No.
But I would like to point. I want to say I like the movie.
Sure.
I don't like it as much as the other two, but it is so much more of a different animal that I think you can kind of give it a pass for a lot of this.
Well, and I think that's the thing that's kind of the point of the podcast we're talking about is we're talking. The point of this podcast is we're not just talking about movies we enjoy or hate or things like that. What we are talking about are sequels and how it relates to being a sequel. And I think that's kind of.
And I personally don't really feel like it's a sequel. I just feel like it's the same character in a totally different universe.
And it is kind of hard for me sometimes to differentiate because, like I said before, I started with Army of Darkness.
Well,
so for
I
me,
watched
that was
Army
the
of
first
Darkness
experience.
at Derek's house in high school.
Yeah, we
And that
used
was
to,
the first,
have
yeah.
Evil Dead marathons where we would watch all 3 Evil Dead movies.
But
I
the first
still
one I
watch
ever
all
saw
3 every
was
year.
Army of Darkness.
Right.
So
Yeah.
And
maybe there's some bias to that.
I have to admit, I mean, I'm sitting here like defending Army of Darkness like vehemently, even though I've already stated that Evil Dead 2 is actually my favorite. And I think for good reason. I think that Robert did actually hit a very good point with the balance between the two, and with the second one being more of a traditional horror movie, so it actually has levity to it. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's one of the reasons why I like it better than the first one. The first one I felt was innovative as far as gore and Raimi's particular directorial style is concerned. But for me, Evil Dead 2 was the perfection of the series. And I really love the fact that unlike other horror movies where our sequels usually take place, like a year or months down the road, this one goes right into it.
Yeah.
We pick up with
technically,
Ash
if you put
right
them
where he
together,
left off.
like you said, there's been fan edits where people have combined the 3 movies by, if you kind of chop off the endings and the beginnings of the movies, you can put these 3 movies together.
Yeah.
But I think basically, though, if you do that, this takes place over the course of a couple of days.
Yeah.
The 3 movies are barely. The first one, between the first and second, it's a day.
Yeah.
And then Army of Darkness takes.
Yeah, the first one's 2 days.
Right.
The first 2 movies are 2 days.
Yep. And then Army of Darkness takes place over a couple of days.
Well, see, that's the thing that I think that you'd probably run into trouble now, because when we meet up with Ash, he's been captured by Arthur. So we really don't know how long he's been in that world.
Well, I think you're true, but I think you get a sense that they went right there. So maybe it was more than a few days, but that it wasn't it hasn't been that long. It maybe is more than a couple of days. You're right, because we don't necessarily see how long it takes him to go from the battlefield back to the castle. So there could be some more time. But again, the idea being it's not months, it's not years.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
In between
Technically,
these.
at the end of the second one, you can see the castle in the background.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
it's pretty big. So I'd imagine they're
Yeah,
fairly
that is
close.
true. Actually, you can't.
But
see the castle.
but you have to eliminate the ending of Evil Dead
Or
2,
it's a
though.
really big castle.
Yeah.
That's true.
But you kind of have to eliminate to put them together. You have to eliminate the ending of Evil Dead 2, or the moment he goes into the time portal, you have to cut that movie off to go into the next one. So I guess, which is funny, we're arguing about logistically where things take place in Army of Darkness.
And again, I think as a sequel, though, too, I mean, Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, and the way everything kind of strings together over just that short period of time, in seeing, you can just see the evolution of that character, which is something you don't get to see very often.
Right.
In any horror movie.
Well, very few horror movies have the same protagonist from
Yeah.
movie to movie. In Nightmare on
And
Elm
even
Street,
if they do, they kill them off right away.
right? Nightmare
Is
on Elm
Jason the
Street.
protagonist
Yeah.
in Friday the 13th?
Yeah. But you did have a couple of characters that carried over. Nightmare on Elm Street, you had a couple of characters. Hellraiser, but not much. I mean, you're not really in a lot of
Aliens.
yeah. Well, a lot of horror movies is a lot of times you're not following the other characters. You're following the monsters. A lot of horror movies are really more based around. You're watching Halloween for Michael Myers. You're watching Nightmare on Elm Street for Freddy. For Jason, things like that. But this is kind of the different horror movie where you're following the protagonist.
Well, it's kind of the same. It's kind of the same thing though, because Jason and Freddy and Mike Myers and all those guys are the anti-hero.
Right.
Ash is very much the anti-hero. I mean, you said
True.
yourself, our hero is Arthur.
Right. Yeah.
But he's not a monster. And that's, I think, the important part, is that, I mean, as much of an asshole as Ash is, he'll still always end up doing the right thing at the end of the day.
But I see what you're saying. Ash is not your typical hero.
Right.
Like you said, in that sense. He's not the same as a lot of from the other horror movies where the heroes really are. The protagonists are the heroes because, they're all on the side of good. They don't have a lot of problems and things like that, but they kind of turn on the head. So I think more than anything, I think we're a little split on how we view this as a sequel. I think in horror cinema history, this is probably the most innovative horror franchise that exists.
I would agree with that.
The most willing to do different stuff and not out of, well, yeah, what do we do with Jason? Well, we'll send him into space because what the fuck else? We've had 8 movies with him now. Or what do you do?
It would be pretty funny if, like, instead of sending people to space, they started sending them back in time. Like,
Yeah. So that
oh
became
no,
the news.
Jason's
Although
in the
it-
1950s.
To be fair, though, the more I think about it, and I'm not saying that I want them to ever do this because I really don't want to test the theory, but the more I think about it, Ash might actually be the only character who could realistically go into space and have it be a decent horror movie.
I'd watch it.
In a
Probably
heartbeat.
would. I mean,
I will
seriously.
watch.
I mean,
it's one of those. I will watch anything with Bruce Campbell, Sam Raimi. I'm signed up for whatever
Yeah.
it is. If they want to do more Evil Dead, and again, that's I think one reason why I like the sequel is because they were all on board. They didn't direct it, but Raimi and Tapert and Campbell were all producers on that movie.
You mean the remake?
The remake,
Okay.
Yeah.
They were all heavily involved in it. They gave it their stamp of approval. It wasn't some people who kind of came out of nowhere and did it. They were heavily involved.
Yeah.
They picked the director.
yeah, and the director is actually a phenomenal director. I can never pronounce his name.
And he's a fan.
Fadid Alvarez? Is that how
can't.
it is? I can't.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name, but he's a fan. But I think that was the key. Is that's what they were looking for. They wanted a different style. They wanted a different take on it.
And I liked the remake as
did
a
too.
good
I thought it was
horror
great.
film. You know, not
Yeah.
like it's not really true to the original in some aspects.
Well, I
but
think
that's a good
I think it's the
aspects it
closest to
is.
the original.
And
yeah,
I don't care
yeah.
what anybody says. That the last 10 minutes of that movie
It's
is the most
fucking awesome.
badass
Where she
10
rips
minutes.
her hand off and
Yeah.
jams into the chainsaw.
So stupid.
It's no
I
more stupid
loved
than
it.
Ash cutting his own
Yeah.
hand
I
off with the
loved
chainsaw
it.
in part 2.
No, he cut his hand off because his hand was possessed.
Right.
She
Yeah.
cut her hand off because her hand was under
She
a
didn't
car.
cut it off. She pulled it
Okay,
off.
pulled it off because
Yeah.
her hand
It's
was stuck
gross.
under a car in the mud. Like that. There's all she had to do was like,
Well, the monster was coming.
yeah.
But, right,
Sorry,
no, I
she
see what
didn't have a
you're saying.
pocket knife and
So
wasn't
that
in the
was-
middle of a
No,
desert
my
That is
point
and
one
winning
thing.
all
I
kinds
could
of
never,
Oscars.
ever fault Evil Dead movies of any kind for being for doing anything quote unquote stupid because
that
they're
was just
Evil
not-
Dead movies.
That was just not believable to me. It's just
Yeah,
like
I
there's
see
no
what you're
reason
saying.
why you couldn't just pull your arm out of that situation. Like,
well, she
like-
did pull her arm out of that
I
situation. She
see
just
what
left
you're-
her hand behind.
Maybe that's what she was trying to do.
I see what you're saying.
there's,
And it went
no
horribly
way,
wrong.
We're not talking about a 3-ton boulder on your arm. We're
Right.
talking about a car and your arm is, you know,
In the mud.
in a muddy. There's no reason why she couldn't
Right.
just pulled her very slick arm out from underneath that car. I didn't believe that part. But other than that one scene that irked me, I really liked the rest of it.
That movie is hardcore.
Yeah, gory.
Yes, very.
That
hard.
movie,
The raining blood was gross, and it was really well done blood. And
it's cringe. Like that movie is all the stuff just cringe. When she chops her hand up, I love that they brought in a lot of elements in the remake.
Yeah.
From the other movies, it gets into her hand. She chops her hand off, and
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite parts about that movie was I think they were smart that they didn't try to recast Ash in the movie. And I actually think that's kind of interesting with it is part of the movie is almost a guessing game of who is Ash.
Yeah.
yeah,
There's like the guy, and it feels like he's Ash. Well, he's not. Then the girl is more Ash, and it's kind of playing with who that kind of character is without trying to say, oh, here's our new Ash.
Yeah.
Because there's nobody who would come in, especially people who don't know the series, they wouldn't give a shit. But I think horror movie fans would not like somebody other than Bruce Campbell playing Ash.
Totally.
I mean, again,
Well,
most people wouldn't care,
it
but
took me back
being
to
the cult movie that it is. Yeah,
the,
I mean,
the
it probably
fans,
wouldn't.
the fans would care.
it took me back to not knowing what was going to happen.
Right. And that was nice.
And almost all other of the remakes, like Nightmare on Elm Street or
Halloween.
any of them, Halloween, Friday the 13th, all of them, you know who the bad guy is, you know how it's going to go down.
Yeah.
Right.
But in this one, you didn't.
Yep.
Because, like you said, there for a while, I thought for sure that guy was going to be the savior.
Right.
Like
He's
all right,
Ash.
that's our guy. And then
I kind of didn't, just because they'd been talking about doing the remake for years, and at one point, the rumor was that they were going to do a female Ash. And
There was a little bit-
that
if
one
you kinda
stuck
read a-
so hard.
If you kind
that
of
by the
read
time the movie
behind
came
it,
out, I was just like, yeah,
I knew
she's
it was
gonna be the
her.
hero.
Yeah, I knew that she really was going to be, but that was a lot of it of kind of reading.
Yeah.
So you kind of knew. But yeah, I agree that.
yeah, well, some of us don't like spoilers.
Well, there you go.
Well, I don't like spoilers either,
I'm
but I mean,
right there with
this
Robert.
is a movie I never thought was actually going to happen. you
Right.
know? I mean, this was something that was just being rumored for
Well,
years.
it was even interesting. There was talk at one point of combining the universes. Mm-hmm. That
yeah, for
her
the
character
sequels.
was going to meet up with Bruce Campbell's Ash,
That would be kind of cool. in
which
the
I think would be
TV
awesome
series.
if she showed up in the show.
If they did that sequel, that would make perfect sense because Army of Darkness is so different from the first two
Right.
that at this point they've set themselves up for that being acceptable in that universe.
Oh yeah, because
So
you can do whatever you
I
want.
would be on board.
Oh,
with
yeah.
that, you know?
Yep. Well, I think
and the actress that plays the part. I mean,
She's
great.
great.
She was
I
phenomenal.
would like to see that movie do an Army of Darkness, like from that to her being
take
an
that
Army.
movie
Yeah.
and then send her back in time
Yeah.
with that amount of gore. Yes.
Yeah.
Why-
That's the movie Robert wanted.
You know what they need to do is they need to do a Army of Darkness sequel, right? And just like they've been doing, to kind of reboot the beginning, right? So we got Ash in the supermarket, and we got the Luddite or whatever.
Deadite.
The Deadite.
very different.
You just
things.
lost your Army of Darkness
I
license,
know.
sir.
Here's
You
my
just
card.
lost all of our Luddite listeners.
But anyway, so the Deadite is attacking Ash. Ash is getting his ass kicked, and out of nowhere comes a female version.
Yep.
That would be a good kick.
That would actually be
Well, I
kind
think
of a
that
cool
actually
way to do
leads
it.
to what is going to be because we're almost done for the podcast, but our last sequence is going to be where we're going to talk about what is the sequel we would make to this movie, and I think Robert kind of gave us his like we're going to kind of talk about is if you were making Army of Darkness 2. What is your Army of Darkness 2? What is your perfect sequel to Army of Darkness?
I don't know. I had my own version, and then now I'm like, I don't know. I like Robert's version better now.
Yeah.
I do love that. That's
Because that would be just so
My
badass
version is
if
just the
like,
intro. Like I
Right.
ain't even got
and it
into
would
the
make
body.
perfect
of it.
sense to the series because they never start off the same way the last one
Right.
ended.
Yep.
So I mean, you could easily get away with it, and you know, hardcore fans of the series will totally forgive it because they'll be like, "Oh well, fuck, they do this with every movie."
right.
I almost want a Dawn of the Dead version where he's just in S-Mart back to like Evil Dead 1 and 2 style where he's just trying to deal with the demons,
I
but he's
love
stuck in
that.
S-Mart. Like,
I think that would be fantastic, and
Yeah.
they're surrounded by deadites all around, and
Well, that would
It's
kind
Black Friday, and then everybody gets all Luddite or dead-lighted.
Army of Darkness 2, Black Friday.
that would really mirror the video game though. The
Yeah.
what is the name of that game?
There's been a bunch of them.
You know,
Okay.
you know what I'm talking about though. Where
Yeah.
because you actually come up with a chainsaw type weapon.
Right. Well, actually, if you get a chance to,
Dead Rising.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you,
I thought you were talking about the Evil Dead.
because there are
video
Evil
game.
Dead games.
Okay.
No,
But Dead
the
Rising
first
is
Dead
very-
Rising. You're stuck in a shopping mall
Is very
Well,
with
yeah.
a bunch of zombies, and you got to figure out how to make weapons
Yeah,
and shit.
it's I mean,
Well, the whole point, I think, is you're supposed to come up with creative ways to kill them so you can get photos, because you're a journalist, aren't you?
I've never played the game.
Yeah,
I think you're a
a lot of it is
journalist.
Well,
the creative ways of doing
is
it.
that one Dead Rising?
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
What's
yeah, it
the
is.
one that's more like kind of a multiplayer thing? And you're just
Left 4
Oh,
Dead.
that's Left 4 Dead, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
okay.
Dead Rising is
Yeah.
no. I think you easily could put the character of Ash in
you
Dead
mean?
Rising, and it would make sense.
Just goes
Probably
back to
inspired
yeah.
by Ash.
Oh, I
Well,
probably
and Dawn
Duke
of the Dead,
Nukem.
but-
If you like video games, Duke Nukem. A lot of the one-liners from the video game character Duke
Hugely,
Nukem
hugely ripped
just
out of it.
stole lines from Army of Darkness.
Even Hail to the King, like just
Yep.
straight up.
Huh.
I was gonna say though, as far as my actual sequel goes, though, as much as I do love Roberts, I think if I hadn't heard that first, my idea was going to be to go back to the original director's cut ending, and just to see, what's Ash going to do in a world that's completely fallen apart now.
Post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, post-apocalyptic. The Deadites have won,
Yep.
and now what does he do?
I think this kind of brings me to kind of my sequel, and I'm going to cheat a little bit because my sequel has already been created.
Can't cheat in my house.
I don't cheat all the time I want. You don't know me.
You don't know me.
I do what I want.
If you like comic style graphic novels and stuff, there's actually a fantastic run of graphic novels of Army of Darkness that's still going to this day, and they do take place right after Army of Darkness. It literally, the next comic takes place. He's just killed the Deadite from S-Mart, and he's kissed the lady, and then the Wizard from back in time shows up, and he had to go to the future to get Ash, and they go back to Egyptian times. And the comics are crazy. There is one that is actually where they're stuck in S-Mart and they're having to fight off. And but the sequel I wanted, because this was actually a movie. This is real. This movie was going to get made, and then it fell through at the last minute, and a comic was created of it. There was going to be a sequel to Freddy vs. Jason. The sequel was going to be Freddy vs. Jason versus Ash.
No way.
I want
Yep.
that movie.
That was
Fuck my intro. I want
Yeah.
that movie.
It was supposed to happen. This was a real thing. But Freddy vs. Jason did really poorly.
Because they didn't have Ash.
Yeah. Well, I agree. And it's a shitty movie. Freddy vs. Jason's really bad.
Because they didn't have Ash.
So, but that was the proposed sequel. Was they were going to bring Bruce Campbell in, and they were going to do a sequel, and it was going to encompass. But Freddy vs. Jason tanked. Then they decided to go off in reboots. Both Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th went off for reboots and stuff. But they actually turned the original script of that into a comic book. The thing I hate about it, the art is bad. The art is not very good in it, which is too bad because the story is fantastic. It's Ash comes to Camp Crystal Lake. It falls at the end. It directly picks up after Freddy vs. Jason. Actually, Freddy is living in Jason's head because Jason kills him. And he's living in his head. And to get out of it, Freddy needs the Necronomicon. So that's how they cross paths, and Ash has to fight both of them. And it is doing with the art that it's fucking awesome because it's Ash fighting Freddy and Jason. And it's amazing.
As far as a crossover story is concerned, I would definitely love to see that, but I don't know if I would actually qualify that as a sequel.
That's true.
True. I think there's a way you could
I
make
think it's
it
a cool
work.
idea, and I would love to definitely see that. I mean, watching Ash just duke it out with Freddy and
I kinda
Jason
wanna
would be
see,
so
like-
fucking awesome. But
Ash versus, the IRS or just something random. Like he's just like trying to do his taxes.
I
Like,
love how this went from what would your next Army of Darkness sequel be to what's your favorite Ash versus scenario?
Yes. Ash versus Predator.
what's yours, Robert?
ooh,
My
Ash versus Predator.
Yeah.
Man, I'd have to think about that.
Ash versus diabetes.
I think that's real life.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
mind throwing Ash into Resident Evil.
Yeah.
Hey, there you go. It would
Makes
at
sense.
least be a better movie than the ones they've already made.
I think an Ash versus Predator would be awesome.
Wow.
So,
Ash versus Batman.
yes. Who does win?
That's
hard.
Well, since Batman's a pussy and won't kill anybody,
Yeah.
I think Ash wins.
Ash will chop him up, which is actually funny. Go back to the comics. The podcast is not supposed to talk about comics, but there is, in the line of Marvel, they've got a series called Marvel Zombies, which is superheroes turn into zombies and kill each other. That is actually started by a crossover, which is in line with the Army of Darkness comic series.
Huh.
It actually does crossover, but it's Ash versus Marvel Zombies, and he's actually partially the cause. And he goes into the Marvel universe. He's hopping universes, and he fights the Marvel Zombies. And he kills Zombie Howard the Duck with a chainsaw.
nice.
It's stupid and awesome.
Stupid and awesome.
So,
But-
quick question before we
It's-
end this: was the Freddy versus Jason versus Ash like anything to do with Raimi or any of them? Were they on board?
They were at least on board enough to. I don't think they were going to make the movie, but I think they
Yeah.
were on board enough to allow.
Like the licensing,
Yeah,
the character,
to
whatever?
let them use the character of Ash, and Bruce Campbell was on board.
Ash versus Leatherface.
Oh,
Chainsaw v. Chainsaw,
Yeah.
bitches.
which is Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Because Dennis Hopper chainsaw fights Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw
That
Massacre
is
2.
pretty much it. Yeah.
Is Dennis Hopper Ash?
No,
Then shut the fuck up.
very true.
This is true.
So
All right.
I think with that, I think we've discussed. I think you've got our thoughts. I think our last segment we're going to just do real quick is somebody who's never seen any of these. Would you recommend Army of Darkness?
Fuck yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that was pretty easy from our discussion. Then I think everybody
It's
here.
PG-13. You can watch it with your family.
Right.
I think you should almost again maybe even watch that one first.
Watch it out of order.
Yeah,
I would. Yeah, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I would not recommend that as. Yeah.
Maybe don't
The
go
other
in
ones
order.
are just
I
I would
at
definitely
it-
watch the first one last.
yeah,
I
they're just
wouldn't-
kind of dated, so it's easier to watch. I think Army of Darkness. You kind of get an idea of what works.
It's not. See, because this goes back. It's so different. It's not even in the
Yeah.
same genre in my mind as the first two. It's so different. So if somebody said, "Hey, I'm looking for a fun movie for Halloween to watch with my kids," I'd be like, "You need to watch Army of Darkness. It's funny. It's good. It's different. You'll like it." If somebody said, "I'm looking for a good old school horror," I'm gonna say Evil Dead.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And actually, I do a lot of times an annual kind of Halloween party. And Evil Dead 2 is a movie we watch.
That's usually what I do too. My
Almost
birthday is in
every
October,
Halloween.
so I always do like a big horror movie marathon.
I would agree. I think honestly, maybe start with Evil Dead 2 and then go to Army of Darkness and then end with Evil Dead.
just kind of just so you know how it works.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I just don't think I would ever start with the first one though.
I
because
don't think
it's,
so.
It's not so much that that the gore factor or anything like that. It's just the fact that that movie can get really annoying, and it might turn you off from watching the other two.
Right. I think Army of Darkness is probably a semi-logical conclusion to Evil Dead 2.
Yeah.
More
You got to
than,
be a connoisseur to watch Army of Darkness. I think.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it
Or,
probably
I mean, Evil Dead.
yeah.
Yeah.
It makes more sense. Yeah. I think to
more
go
to
from like Evil Dead 2
appreciate- yeah.
to Army of Darkness and then watch Evil Dead. It helped create the cabin in the woods.
Yeah.
Kind of horror tropes. If you're interested in all of horror, if you've never seen Evil Dead, go see Evil Dead. It's a movie you should see if you like this kind of stuff. And if you just like enjoyable movies that are stupid and fun, Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, I think, are great.
And I think I'd like to end too on I would rate this as an okay sequel.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we ended up. I think Ryan and I are probably bigger on it as a sequel, and you guys are a little less, but nobody hates it as a sequel.
And I think before we end, if anybody actually listens to this, we'd like to hear your ideas for a sequel to
Yes,
Army of
tell
Darkness.
us your best idea, and if,
Leave it in the comments or however it's going to work
And
here.
remember, you can blame me for the French. Ryan is blamed for the rape thing.
I always get stuck with the rape thing.
What was the other
who else did we offend?
the Mexicans?
Mexicans.
Was
Jake.
I was just curious if
You
it took
also,
place.
by the way, you got two against you because you hit the M word for the little people.
That's
yeah,
true.
I did also think of that.
Did I say that?
Yes.
did.
PC one.
We
did.
apologize. We do apologize for that one.
Yeah.
The rest of it, we don't. We don't apologize for anything. But
Yeah, there's little. Yeah, but those little midgets were evil bastards, and they came from the dirt.
well,
And
even
they
tech-
are different. They
weren't even
different.
little people. They were
were like
they were little
5
people. They
inches
were like
tall.
They weren't little people.
they were little.
little.
They were Lilliputians.
Oh, we get so
Gullivers.
sidetracked so easily.
Oh,
I know.
well, with that of us getting sidetracked, thank you for listening. Yes, leaving your comments, your thoughts. Too in the comments. Leave a sequel you'd like us to talk about.
Subscribe.
Subscribe. all that fun stuff. Keep an eye on for Dirty Sprocket. We got a lot more coming. With that, until next time, thanks for listening. Bye.